Orbán didn't lose to democracy, he lost to Brussels, and to his own success. Europe's political class greeted Hungary's election the way it greets every defeat of a nationalist government, with a sermon. Viktor Orbán was out, therefore democracy was back. Brussels was vindicated. Hungary, presumably, had awakened from an illiberal fever. That story is tidy, flattering, and wrong. Hungary's election was not a morality play about enlightened Europe rescuing a wayward member state. It was a power struggle in which the European Union and the wider globalist ecosystem spent years squeezing Orbán's government, while Orbán himself slowly turned a formidable sovereignist project into an aging political machine that could no longer justify its own costs. Start with the part the European establishment prefers not to say aloud. The pressure on Hungary was never merely legalistic. The language was rule of law, European values, fundamental rights. The reality was political discipline. Budapest was singled out not only because of judicial disputes or procurement concerns, but because it refused to fall in line on the questions that matter most to the post-national governing class: migration, border control, veto power, and the right of a member state to resist the bloc's ideological direction. Even European Parliament language made clear that Hungary was treated as more than a compliance problem. It was treated as a challenge to the Union's preferred future. The Soros factor belongs in that story as well, not as cartoon conspiracy but as institutional reality. Open society has operated in Hungary since the 1980s, funding scholarships, media, academic exchange, civic groups and rights-based activism. That does not mean George Soros personally bought the 2026 election. It does mean that for decades a network of organizations, assumptions and political habits was built, one that helped define which causes are respectable, which language is legitimate and which governments are beyond the pale. Power in modern politics rarely arrives as a suitcase of cash. More often it arrives as atmosphere, vocabulary and structure. Yet conservatives who stop the analysis there are indulging themselves. Orbán was not simply overwhelmed by outside enemies, he also gave them their opening. The formal reasons used to freeze or delay EU funds: judicial independence, corruption controls, procurement practices, risks in the use of EU money, and disputes over asylum and academic freedom, were politically useful to Brussels, but they were not wholly invented. Orbán allowed his critique of Europe to become fused with the appearance, and in some cases the reality, of a state growing too comfortable with loyalist networks, too casual about institutional decay, and too convinced that cultural combat could substitute for administrative renewal. Brussels weaponized the rules. Orbán made himself easier to hit. That is why this election matters far beyond Hungary. Orbán was right about several of the biggest questions of the age. He understood earlier than most Western leaders that mass migration destabilizes nations, that bureaucratic universalism corrodes democratic accountability, and that Europe's ruling elites had grown contemptuous of ordinary loyalties. He built the politics of borders, family, civilizational confidence, and national sovereignty that resonated well beyond Budapest. But being early is not the same as being durable. A political movement can be correct in diagnosis and still fail in government, and when it does, it hands its enemies the most dangerous gift imaginable: a true theme wrapped in a discredited vehicle. That, more than anything, is what Orbán's opponents exploited. Peter Magyar did not defeat him by running as a borderless European progressive. He won by stripping Orbán of his monopoly on patriotism and turning the election back toward corruption, competence and public exhaustion. His party did not repudiate national interest or border discipline. It repackaged them. That is the most humiliating kind of defeat for an incumbent nationalist: not to lose to the opposite worldview. but to lose to a rival who borrows your themes and offers them in cleaner wrapping. Hungary did not vote to abolish sovereignty, it voted to stop paying Orbán's price for it. The market reaction was brutal in its clarity. After Orbán's defeat, the forint rose. Equities rallied and borrowing costs fell. Investors were not cheering because they had suddenly discovered a passion for Hungarian civic virtue. They were repricing the country as a place more likely to recover frozen EU funds, restore predictable relations with Brussels and function more normally inside Europe's political economy. For a leader who built his career on defending the nation, that is a particularly cruel verdict. It means the outside world concluded that Hungary might become more governable once the man who claimed to protect it was gone. The lesson for the right is not that Brussels was innocent, it plainly was not, nor is it that the Soros network was irrelevant. It plainly was not. The lesson is harsher. Sovereignist politics cannot live forever on instinct, symbolism and opposition. It must build states that are clean enough to deny adversaries their easiest charges, competent enough to survive economic and institutional siege, and flexible enough to renew leadership before fatigue becomes rot. The right's problem is not merely that it faces a hostile establishment, it is that long incumbency teaches movements how to fight while slowly teaching them to forget how to govern. So no, Hungary was not saved by democracy, but neither was Orbán merely robbed by globalism. He lost in the more consequential way. After years of real external pressure, he failed to prove that his politics of national resistance could still produce a state worth trusting. That is not a liberal triumph, it is a conservative warning. If the right wants to outlast Brussels, outmaneuver transnational pressure and withstand the cultural machinery aligned against it, it will need more than courage and slogans. It will need renewal, discipline and a governing model that makes its case not only in speeches, but in results.